To be able to give them what they come there for, but you need to be, like you said, keep opening the doors, keep opening the doors, keep opening the doors, so different people will come in, and that, because otherwise you risk becoming, you know, sclerotic, where your creative arteries just fill up with plaque, and it's the same thing over and over and over again. Then it's just ritualistic, and there's no way out of that.
I can't easily talk to people or drink with the rabbit mask on.
Day in the life of a Empire shoot was problem solving, having a lot of fun, punctuated by moments of frustration because things like there being no money and crew getting pissed off and that kind of stuff.
And I've gone all over the world and climbed hills and valleys and dales and swamps and rain and everything, just to find the more original Danse Macabre artwork, which comes from the 1400s. And I pretty much stop around the 1800s, because after that it gets too modern for me.
It got horrible reviews. I mean, it got 1-star reviews, half-star reviews. You can keep the keep. Keep away from the keep. And those are the headlines, you know? And that's also the title of my book. Hey, guys, you know, come on.
When this show started, I wanted it to be very much in the spirit of the classic horror host shows.
Well, also with the horror genre, you can read horror novels and get a completely different experience. It's not formulaic. You can read a Rath James White book, and that's very, very different from a Charles L. Grant book.
It's harder and harder to find something genuinely scary. And I think that the trick of it, at least for me, for the stuff that I prefer, is that nuanced way of having things happen in the foreground and the background, so that there's no place that you can, like, quote, stand in the story and be safe. You know?
I think I agree. And I also think that there's an element of us in that too, right? It's knowing our place, right? This idea, I think there's a megalomania in human nature and a kind of narcissism in human nature.
You think?
Maybe.
Other avenues that I want to go down. It's not like a late blooming realization. I've always had these things that I wanted to explore. I wouldn't have done so many different kinds of horror if that compulsion to keep exploring wasn't there, or, you know, and the foray into crime fiction. The need for a new horizon is there, rather than just staking out the same turf.
Lord, this is huge. So nobody's really talking about this right now. So The Pale Door, which is my next, it's a horror Western that I made with Joe R. Lansdale, and easily the most ambitious film I've ever made, most personal film I've ever made. And we've been talking about it, and we're like, look, let's just put this out in August. If there are some theaters open, we'll do some socially distanced theaters, but like, let's push it in drive-ins.
I think you got a call or a fax from some lady in Hawaii. She says, my sister has just died, and I find among her effects a manuscript called The Shadow Out of Time by H.P. Lovecraft. Do you want it?
And I think if you read a good horror story, it's almost like a vacuum cleaner. You know, it hoovers up those fears. You know, it gives you, it scares you. You know, I think in a way it's quite therapeutic, and you know.
We need some fun, man. We need to listen to more music, read more books, just do things we enjoy.
One night the phone rang, and it was my dad, and he said, if you're not busy tonight, I've done something I think is pretty good, and I think maybe you and the boys might enjoy it. I think it's pretty good. Yeah, pretty good. And it was The Grinch.
A genre of the dramatic arts that seeks to elicit a response from within an array of dark emotions: fear, anxiety, disgust, paranoia, terror, stress, gallows humor, etc.
Hello, and welcome back to Visited by Voices Live. It is Friday, the 19th. Seems like this month has gone incredibly fast if I'm saying it's the 19th already. And I am joined today by Mike A. Arnzen. Now, Michael Arnzen is the author of a number of novels and a ton of short stories and essays. A lot of writing about writing, and he is the recipient of 4 Stoker-Awards in 4 categories, which has to be some kind of record for just the sheer amount of diverse awards from a single trophy. That is Best Novel, Best Short Story Collection, Best Poetry Collection, and the Nonfiction Award. So he basically has some writers we've had on the show have a little house that's in the background sitting on a mantle. He's developing his own like holiday village.
That's right.
Hey Mike, how are you?
Good. You know, if I was geeky enough, I'd buy like a train set and run the trains through the Stoker trophies.
I'm convinced I'd start a fire if I tried to play with trains because they have the smoke. And so you actually come to the show first off as someone who was in the chat, and at the moment I saw you were out there, I was like, now wait a second. That's interesting. But also as someone who really fits really nicely into the fold of one of our most popular subjects on the show, which is the Del Abyss line.
Oh.
So I want to definitely spend a little bit of time on that. We're not there yet, but you, of course, in 1994, very early for you. I mean, it's literally only 4 years since Baby Teeth was in Dead of Night.
Wow. Yeah.
So I mean, but that's basically the beginning, right?
Yeah, that was a very early piece that I published. Dead of Night magazine. Wow.
Yeah.
It's one of those early vampire fanzines from the late 80s, early 90s.
When an editor like Lynn Stein could come out there and actually make a product that could make it to a market in the physical world.
Right.
Whoa. And a lot of people started there. Like, I think all of us wondered when we got that first Xeroxed and stapled magazine that we didn't get paid for, whether that would ever amount to anything or else we were all fooling ourselves. But it did matter.
Oh, it did matter. And sure, the small press of those days was pretty amazing. And I think it was, rightfully called the underground press by a lot of people, right? Or underground zines. I didn't even really know about that whole world. I kind of stumbled my way into it when I first just started looking for, what can fiction writers do? What places can they sell their work? And I just found in market guides these crazy magazine titles. I was like, what? There's a magazine called Festering Brain Sore. I have to read that magazine, let alone submit to it. And that was a real magazine title, Festering Brain Sore.
Well,
I published in it, actually.
The first zine to publish me was called Lime Green So
Lime Green.
There you go. The editor was a young lady by the name of Lainey the Oyster.
Sure, that's her real name.
I'm sure she legally changed it. That not a question.
But well, Lauren, I mean, that scene was explosive. Like there were magazines about the small press underground magazine world. I'm drawing blanks on the names of them, but like there'd be like reviews of hundreds of magazines that people were putting out in their basements using Xeroxes, copy machines and whatnot. And now on the internet, everybody can self-publish, either through a website or, direct to Amazon. And it's that same energy, and we're seeing it in the public. But back then it had kind of an outsider, only people who had access to these magazines knew about them kind of feel. And it felt legitimately like, taboo or unique, outsider, and kind of punk and hip. And I feel like we've lost some of that today. It's hard to tell how hip a magazine really is these days if everybody's reading it online. I don't know.
Well, yeah, and that's always been the big problem with anything that begins underground is when it gets bigger. I mean, let's face it, like the Walking Dead television show has been on the air for 40 decades now, right? And it's been #1 for all of them. Horror is everywhere today. Which, outside of anything having the byline by Stephen King, wasn't always the case.
Right.
Horror was always kind of a more sidelined genre. I mean, don't get me wrong, you have your Shirley Jacksons, your William Peter Blatty's. I'm not taking anything away, but that was one band, and then there was everything below the iceberg surface, right?
Yeah, I really like the way you're putting that. And I think it's inherent to the horror to kind of want to go under the surface. We have horror readers have a distrust of the tip of the iceberg. We always know there's something behind that, right? There's something under the surface waiting to get us. So, or just, something in the dark, murky waters that we want to explore. That's what horror fans are, I think. They want to go into that. They don't trust the surface. They want to go beneath it. And, the more mainstream the genre gets, the more popular it gets, then the more superficial things seem to be. Because they're targeting markets and everything's measured by a committee to determine, what choices are made artistically. Whereas kind of in the punk side of the avant-garde side of horror is really free-thinking authors who are, pushing the boundaries legitimately. That's a catchphrase, it's a cliche, but legitimately pushing the boundaries, inviting people into to look at the dark side, to look at things they don't want to see, like lifting up a rock and looking at what writhes in the soil. That's the kind of stuff that we do. And I would hate for us to lose that, because that's what attracts people to the genre. And, frankly, that is what makes it popular.
The horror has a lot in common with burlesque in a way. In that response, is that it's looking for a certain amount of honesty, and that is polite society just can't tolerate, right?
Right.
Like the idea of it's only acceptable if you're going to a bachelor party, and there's those of us that just have always been drawn to it, always wanted to see something a little bit more real, which is so strange for such a fantastical genre, but it's one of the few genres that can explore the psychology of the reader, right?
Right.
Because why am I afraid of this? I've used the example a million times, but Jay Arnzen didn't write a haunted house novel. He wrote a novel about not being able to make a mortgage payment.
Right.
But to get under the skin of how that feels, you needed it to be a haunted house, because no other form could really do it.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the familiar tropes of the genre they're like the crutches or something. They make us feel safe when we're in these weird headspaces as we're reading. It's like we can trust this author because they understand, the familiar signposts that somebody needs to stay sane while reading. And some authors like Lovecraft or something, maybe they forgot about that, But there should be a mix of that. If I'm reading a horror novel, I want it to go crazy. I want it to go insane. And I'm very impatient with the familiar signposts of the genre, the tropes and cliches. I get very, very impatient with that. Maybe I'm just I'm getting older now or something. But horror is about expecting the unexpected. It really is. There were comic books named "The Tales of the Unexpected." When we were growing up, we looked at that comic because we want to be surprised, and that's kind of should be a dominant mode of our genre, is surprise. If it's not there, it's horrible.
Well, sure, and we can definitely get into the state of things, both in film and book, and where perhaps that issue is very prominent in places. But I do want to start at the beginning. So, how did you get bit by the horror bug? What started it for you?
Well, I don't know. I see. To me, horror is like a worldview, so it's always been kind of the way I'm looking at the world. But I've had to blame my parents, like everybody else, I'm sure. There's a story I always tell, and it's about the way that my dad kind of made me be his companion in the 1970s when he was going to all those golden age horror films, and my mother wouldn't go with him. So he took me as kind of, I don't know, maybe I was his crutch or something. But I was very young watching these rated R films, and I probably shouldn't have. It'd be the kind of stuff that you wouldn't show your kids at home on Netflix. But whenever something really gory or sexual came on the screen, he'd cover my eyes. So I was like this little kid writhing under his hand, going, "What's happening?" 1 second I see somebody with a knife, then basically black screen for me, and then he'd lift his hands, and then I'd see a body on the floor. So I think that actually encouraged me to want to know more about what the hell was happening in these movies. And after a while, I realized I could buy the novelizations, and to me that was a way of sneaking into these rated R movies and getting to see what my dad was covering my eyes for. Was reading horror books like Jaws, The Amityville Horror, Rosemary's Baby, and then later Carrie. I mean, all these things kind of became my sneaky way of finding out more about what was being held back from me. And I've always been that kind of curious reader and film fan. Something that people are shunning or are telling me I wouldn't want to watch or I shouldn't watch or read. That's the stuff I want to read. It's a little, I don't know. Is that perverse of me?
I think we're back to that word honest. I think most people would like to, in a safe way, explore this stuff. Now, there's people who don't, and they're reading in other genres, or watching other shows or whatever. But I think that a large majority of people are slowly, as the world seems to be spinning more and more out of control around them, and noise from the evening news or whatever seems just as fantasy as anything we could write. I think they're trying to decode it. And I think the horror genre is just a place to decode it. Doesn't mean they're going to come up with the right answers, but right now, an answer is pretty attractive.
Yeah, it's a smart way of putting it.
So, 94, grave markings.
Wow.
Okay, so 4 years after you break into the underground press, you have a book that makes it into bookstores everywhere as a mass market paperback, which I desperately miss, but that's a whole different conversation. I can remember walking into a Borders, going to their horror section, which was a real horror section, not like the Barnes and Noble horror section that we have now, which is called the Stephen King section.
Exactly.
And I remember when the Del Abyss line came out, they were stocked and they were fronted on so everything else was spines, and then they were fronted because they had these wonderful covers.
Yeah, they had the best covers in the world.
They were impressionistic, and they were disturbing, and here's the most important part, they felt modern. They were warning you that you weren't getting yesterday's horror.
Right. They wouldn't put skeletons on the cover, whereas like Zebra paperbacks or Leisure or something, they were happy to do that. And it was clear, to go back to what we've been keeps coming up, more honest, less cliche. Like it was eschewing or avoiding the cliche altogether and saying, this is something different. This is truly scary stuff. And, you know, Kathy Koja's book, The Cipher, really kind of goes there, right? It's so experimental. Just the writing style is crazy. It's a book unlike anything I'd ever read up until that point. And I was like, this is the Abyss line. They've got me with this book. I'm going to read all of them now.
The first 3 years of that line is so... I don't think it's matched. I really don't think it's matched in horror history for a book line. You could make a book line by taking titles from all over the place, right? But it's remarkable. And when you look at the class of people, yourself, Kathy Koja, Brian Hodge, when you start to look at the talent pool, and I don't use talent to mean something like you're born with. I believe you worked for your talent, right? But, because I don't want to take your work away from you. But you look at this group of people with this immense storytelling capacity.
Right.
I'm still mind blown. I mean, there's been great anthology series that have shown this. Charles Grant's Shadows anthology is the one that I hold closest to my heart. But Tom Monteleone's Borderlands anthologies, I did that later. And I'd say that the big unsung heroes of more recent times, the Horror Library series from Cutting Block Books, definitely was the most modern version of that, whereas the top tier horror. Speaking of that, I think you know where I'm going.
Uh-oh.
There's a book called Horror Library Volume 5 that features both of us.
Yes.
And it's not the only book that does. How crazy is that?
We're in a couple, aren't we?
Yeah, the other big one, of course, is PS Press's Darkness on the Edge.
Right.
Tales inspired by the songs of Bruce Springsteen.
That book deserves more attention. That's a good book.
It is now, but it's sort of in a weird place at the moment, I think. It really needs to get to a non-prestige press, I guess, to get more widely read.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of
I love those anthologies, though, that are inspired, that have a unique theme to them. So that one's all fiction inspired by Bruce Springsteen, and horror seems to be very popular in the horror genre to have these kind of theme anthologies. You don't see other genres really doing that much. Maybe some science fiction titles, but it's because fear is applicable to everything, and everything has a dark side. So I love it when publishers are advertising for stories based on a theme. And to me, that's like a writing prompt that I'll try to respond to, as a creative writer. And I'll end up writing some things I never would have written otherwise. And that Bruce Springsteen anthology is an example. I met the editor, Harrison Howe, at a HWA meeting, I think, in Newark, New Jersey. And he told me he was thinking about doing that. And, I was like, what a cool idea, and he let me take a stab at a story and submit it. And I based it, I took his Bruce Springsteen song, Everybody Has a Hungry Heart, and wrote the short story based on that from kind of an Edgar Allan Poe kind of approach. And what's yours about, Lauren?
Well, mine is based on the track Point Blank.
Ah, okay.
And it's a story about it's kind of a Poe thing, but it's kind of a psychedelic giallo take on Edgar Allan Poe, actually. Which, there's a bullet hole in a wall, and that's actually a portal back into the crime, and you can tear down the wall, opening the hole. Whatever. It's a fun story. Go read it. If you can get a hold of the book at this point. I don't know what the status of that book is.
It might be available on Amazon as a Kindle ebook. I'm not sure. I mean, come on, a psychedelic giallo? Who doesn't want that?
Well, look at this. I mean, just this. I'm going to call it. The table of contents was all called track listing in this case because that seems appropriate. Peter Abrahams, Guy Adams, Michael Arnzen, Gary Braunbeck, Lawrence Conley, Kurt Dinnan, Lauren Dixon, Gerard I always screw up his last name. Pronounce it for me.
I say Horner.
Horner. Sounds good to me. Nancy Kilpatrick, Sarah Langen, Elizabeth Massey, James Moore, John Palisano, Tom Piccarelli.
Oh, yeah.
Nate Southard, Jeffrey Thomas, Lee Thomas, T.M. Wright. I mean, that is a dynamite book. You remove me and it's even better, probably.
Nah.
But it's just one of those things. Now, Harrison and I ran in the same circles back then. I knew him and I knew of the project because it was a word of mouth kind of thing. It wasn't an open call sort of thing at all. He went out there and targeted people.
I see.
And I tried to sell him on the idea of an Alice Cooper based anthology after that because I thought that was like perfect. And he's like, yeah, but I don't really like Alice Cooper. And I was like,
oh,
because it seems so perfect, right?
Yeah, exactly. He should have followed up on what he started. And Alice Cooper, I think, co-edited an anthology. One of the was it Hot Rocks or something like that? Damn it, I forgot the name of it. But there's like a rock and roll horror anthology that Alice Cooper was part of once upon. Shock Rock 2. I don't know. Maybe an audience member knows, but hey, Alice Cooper's the best. You gotta love Alice.
How can you not? But I always thought that just like Boris Karloff lent his name, if nothing else, to those old the original Dell, not the modern Dell paperbacks of those anthologies of suspense stories, like Alice Cooper horror short stories. I'm not seeing where this goes wrong. I mean, Springsteen, there's a lot there to work from, but it's not. You got to look a little bit sideways at it, right?
Yeah.
But that's kind of what's cool about it too.
Right.
But I thought, anyway.
So you were saying you think of the Del Abyss line as kind of an anthology of greats, and I think you're right. Like I collected those books, and it was the cover of Kathy Koja's novel that inspired me to submit my manuscript to begin with to Del Abyss. And like I didn't have an agent. I was working in the underground press, small press. I'd published quite a bit. I mean, a lot of short stories. And I even managed to, have one reprinted in the year's best horror that Carl Edward Wagner selected. And that was a tattoo-related story. So I was like working on a bunch of tattoo-related pieces at the time. I was writing for tattoo magazines and whatnot. But I wanted to try to write something longer than a short story, and Grave Markings was the result. But I didn't know how to publish a novel. So I just printed it out, put it in a box, and sent it to the place that I thought had the best book covers. And lo and behold, they called me back like a month later. I was very, very lucky. That's usually not what happens in this industry. You get thrown out, and you're lucky if you get a reply if you submit an unsolicited manuscript without an agent or something. So I was very lucky. But Jean Cavalos and her assistant editor, Tony Ganji, took a risk on me, and that was great. And they told me my cover letter sold it to them. I think Tony, who was the assistant editor to Jean Cavalos, who's a future guest on your show, everybody should watch that. But her assistant, Tony, told me years later that he read my cover letter, which was about, Grave Markings is about a serial killer who's a tattoo artist who does it just to get on the news or something like that. And he said he laughed at it and said, "This is preposterous. If this guy can pull this off, I'll pass it along to Gene." And he must have thought I pulled it off because lo and behold, I was lucky enough to sell that book, and even luckier to win the Bram Stoker-Award for it. So, I mean, I'm not trying to brag. I'm just saying, that book was you're right, it was a big breakthrough moment in my career. It helped me become a mass market author. But I learned a lot from working with Gene, and I kind of stumbled into it, but I rapidly learned about the profession, and things work a little bit differently in New York City with the big publishers than they might with the publisher of Festering Brain Sore magazine.
Both for the good and the bad, I would imagine. Right. This actually leads right in. So Daniel Shine asks, can you tell us a little bit about what inspired Grave Markings?
Well, I think of that book really, it's about a tattoo artist and the world and culture of tattoos. And like in the early 90s, fewer people had tattoos, or at least were publicly showing them than we have today. Like nowadays, you can't drive more than 4 blocks in any large city at least and not pass a tattoo shop. Back then, they were rare, 1 per town, and it was considered like the psychic prediction shop or the tarot reader. Like tattoo artists were shunned by mainstream society back then. Maybe they are a little bit nowadays, but for different reason. It's more of an economic thing now, I think. But anyway, and to me, I was just like really entranced by this kind of like vice world. Like I find myself always intrigued by the world of vices, right? So they're like crimes that don't really hurt anybody except the person that commits them. And like, so to me, that's like a great realm of psychology to explore. And an addiction to tattoos, an addiction to pain and the needle, these are curious points for me. So, I mean, generally speaking, tattoo culture inspired that book. But when I peel away the surface of it myself and look back at it years later, to me, it's really a book about censorship and freedom. That is, like, how far can you really go with your art? And, you know, the horrifying tattoos and the extreme ends that the serial killer goes to in that book are over the top and insane. But really, it's also about like how far could I go as a writer doing insane things to my characters, and I just had a field day with that. You know, the body count in that book is crazy, and you know, a lot of it pushes the envelope of realism. I mean, there's some things I made up in that book that you cannot do with tattoo ink. You can't do with human bodies, but I don't care. I mean, it's fiction, so I just had fun with it. And so that's really the answer, is that I was curious about the tattoo culture or subculture in that day, but also just kind of generally exploring vices and you know, censorship, the topic of censorship and art.
Do you have tattoos yourself?
The answer is no. I've researched the hell out of tattoo culture. A lot of my friends have tattoo. I love body art. I like, you know, not only appreciate it, I'm in awe of it, you know. But something about, it's not that I'm afraid of the needle. I think that would actually be the interesting, cool part of it. I'd probably become a pain addict if I started doing it. But I'm afraid of bad art being permanently etched on my skin and not being able to do much with it except try to cover it up. You know, writers like to revise, and tattoos are damn hard to revise. So it's one of those things. It's the permanency of it.
That's why you got to take your time and make sure you get what you want.
Yeah. Well, I mean, do you know your artist who did that? Or did you have that piece of art with you when you went to your artist?
So,
like, that's an intimate thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah, so I spent about 3 months drawing that.
Aha!
So, and I cheated, by the way. So I took a real photo of an owl, and I traced it, and then I used that tracing to trace a more stylized version on top of in ink. And I kept working, and the girl's face is the same process. That girl's face actually comes from a World War II poster. It's not the famous We Can Do It, but it's by the same artist.
Interesting.
So.
Yeah. Well, that's really cool. And that's not cheating. I think, you know, a lot of artists kind of trace and then add. It's a very common practice. I think that's cool. So you drew your own body art, you see? So that, like, you had a cool piece to work with. Like, I would walk into a tattoo shop, and I'd be the person who couldn't pick which one from like the flash pictures in the books. I wouldn't be able to settle on any of them. I'm a horrible shopper. So
I just think that you have to have something that means something to you. I mean, I have many tattoos, but I started over here with the Bride of Frankenstein, and it goes to modern horror on this shoulder across my back. There's also a big piece on my back as well, which is a different thing. It's kind of like this piece. But everything means something to me. Like, it's all important to me, and it wouldn't be important to anyone else. Like, they can look at it and go, really? Black and white horror movies? Yeah. But you want to know what? Growing up as a kid, growing up relatively poor and rural, horror movies got me through my days. Make no mistake.
Right, yeah. You know, and most of the people I know, they have stories like that about them, you know, what the significance of their body art is. But I love that you have it as a kind of a testimony to horror's role in your life as well as other elements. Black and white horror movies, I love those. I think I saw you had a video of your collection.
Oh, just of the 30s. Yeah. So I own almost all of the existent 30s horror movies. The problem is we don't know what's really lost and what's not because a lot of titles have not been commercially viable for so long. So no one's put them out. So they may be out there on reels. You know, we don't know. And I worry about the days of streaming coming when there's no more physical media because there's going to be even less opportunity for those movies. Because streaming services it's all Marvel and action movies, and I just don't see, horror melodramas from the 30s, which is what I love, really getting the having a service that really supports them.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. It's so much marketing goes into this. What is everybody streaming? They can watch the clicks, and so they go where the audience is, neglecting where the art might really be, and neglecting how to bring new audiences to old works, even though they were very popular in their day. That's really tragic. Plus, there's a degree to which making a film, transferring it to computer streamable quality actually reduces the quality of the film. So while it might kind of re-record the film, it's not really preserving it. It's degenerating it. So I'm with you.
Yeah,
100%. I love the Blu-ray restoration of things though. Like I have the Invisible Man collection. Those Blu-rays of the Invisible Man are pretty fun to watch.
That restoration of the first film I found remarkable because I expected it to show off the flaws of the optical effects of the era, and quite the reverse. It enhanced the experience, and I was like, all right, they were brilliant filmmakers. That's all there is to it. I'm not sure the guys that are just pushing buttons on computers today can compare.
Yeah, well, it takes a lot of work. It's not just pushing a button, right?
No,
I think that was James Whale. I could be wrong.
It was.
It was?
Yep.
So, yeah. The guy who did Frankenstein doing that, too. That's amazing.
Well, Bride of Frankenstein is my favorite film of all time, so by no small measure. D.T. Berkowitz has a question that actually leads to where the conversation was going anyway. He says, you've published many different stories since Grave Markings. Yeah, about, 90 published shorts? I'm not kidding. Do you have any more plans for full-length novels?
Well, I'm glad the son of Sam is in the room.
I told you it's a diverse audience. We have dog lovers too. You saw your cat, you saw mine. But...
D.T. Berkowitz, sorry, I'm not. I hope you take that with a grain of salt. But of course, the story for me determines the length. There are a lot of writers, they see it as their job to kind of produce at least one book a year. Like that's how they measure their career. And audiences start to expect the next book from an author, particularly series authors, right? Who have like Clive Barker might do 3 books in the Sacrament series or something. But for me, it's like the concept has to determine the length first, right? So often short stories are kind of the length I find most of my ideas fall into, sometimes novella length. But I mean, there are some concepts that I'm thinking could be great novels. And, there's a vampire plot that I'm developing right now. I don't want to talk too much about it, because if I talk about it, I kind of let the air out of the balloon, so to speak. But yeah, I'm working on a very unique, in my opinion, vampire premise that I can't wait to finish. Because I've been working on this for a while now, and actually tearing things apart and starting over again, which is hard to do. But anyway, thanks for the question. There'll be more novels for me. I know they only come out once every 7 to 10 years, but oh well. They're good, and people tell me they're good, so maybe it'll be worth the wait. That sounded very egotistical.
As long as it's honest.
Yeah.
Dan says he just ordered a copy of Proverbs for Monsters, and the concepts I've read are beautifully mad. Can you tell us a little bit about that book?
Oh yeah, in getting ready for this, I set some of my books aside over here. This is a copy of Proverbs for Monsters. Yeah, wow. There's a lot in that book that I'm proud of, because it's a collection of kind of what people have told me are my best short stories and poems. So like, everything in there ranges from works that were reprinted in like a year's best anthology, or works that, like I'd read it at a public reading and everybody would laugh, and it just works, So it's like the best of Arnzen, really. It's a little old now, but to me, that I'm very proud of that anthology, and I'm very happy that Dark Regions Press put that out. They did a really fantastic series of editions with that. There's like some really nice leather-bound slipcase copies you can get if you're a true collector of horror books. But I'm glad you ordered it. And let's see, what else can I say about that? Like, just thinking of it, one of my favorite stories in there is called Exorcist Land. And it's just about a theme park that's set in It's like all the rides in the theme park are inspired by horror films. But the Exorcist ride is the scariest one and leads to the conclusion of the story in a sick way. I don't know. It's kind of like me having fun with the films of the genre, I think. It's one of my favorite stories in there.
Now, one of your most proud students is in the chat, and Sarah says, Proverbs is a great one. Gorlitt's Omnibus is my favorite.
The Gorlitt's Omnibus. Yes, thank you, Sarah. That one, I'm also proud of the Gorlitt's Omnibus. That's an interesting book. I had it over here. I wish I had grade markings. I don't know why I don't. But, Gorlitt's Omnibus. This is like 10 years worth of poems that fit into that size of a book, because because the concept of Gorlitt's is that they're very, very short poems. And for those of you who are totally unaware of what that word even means, it was kind of a form I started based on a Palm Pilot. This was back in like the year 2000, 2001. Somebody gave me a Palm Pilot, which is a predecessor to like a cell phone, all right? It was a data computer, it was a handheld device. But it had a very small screen, and I found you could only write like 10 lines on that screen of no more than like 6 words at most in length. It's a very small, kind of postage stamp sized screen. So I was like, I'm not a businessman. I don't know how to use this thing that you gave me as a gift. So I just started treating it like a literary toy, and I would write poetry on it. And then I would post these poems on the web for people who also had these things to download into. And it was just like a little gimmicky kind of joke at first, but I used it to kind of challenge myself to write short. And I ended up writing hundreds? I don't know. A lot of poems that are teeny tiny poems, and that's what are all collected in the Gorlitt's Omnibus. A lot of those things that were published online, and more in books as well. So thank you. And some of them are just funny. I don't know about you, Lauren. I like horror because it makes me laugh as much as it creeps me out or it gives me nightmares. The absurdity of horror is a riot to me. I like a good. I think a lot of true horror fans who are probably in your audience right now are like you and me. We will be the person in the movie theater cackling while everybody else is holding their breath or something. Maybe behind our hand because we don't want to disturb other people. But there's something about that that's just like it's outrageous. Some of the stuff that these movies and show us, or that these writers think of, and I love that. I love that feeling of I can't believe they went there, or I can't believe they surprised me that they came up with that concept. Who would think of such a thing? That's the whole genre to me. I love that, and I laugh in glee whenever I see it done well.
Well, I think of horror really as a freedom cause. Like it's one of the few places that is not constrained necessarily by anything. You saw the definition at the beginning of the video. You've seen it before, but it's true. It's about the reaction from the audience. So whatever you need to do to get those reactions from within that array of emotions, it's cool. It's horror. You can't do that with a Western. You can't suddenly say, so this Western is going to take place at the bottom of the sea on a sub. You just can't do it, right? Hey, I'm going to have a comedy, but it's not going to be funny. That doesn't work. But you can have a horror novel that's not scary. Sure, you can.
Hmm.
It'll have to have another emotion that's inside the dark array, right? But it all can fit. So I think that for those of us who get it, it's kind of like the difference between hearing a joke the first time and sharing the joke. Because when you hear a joke for the first time, you may or may not laugh. It might work for you, maybe it didn't work for you, whatever. But when you know the joke and you're waiting to see the reaction, it's different. It's different. So like when we know what's going on, you know, and the gore or the scares or the jump scares or whatever it is that is happening on film or in a book, it's kind of like you have a sense of, I get it. They're speaking a language I understand. So yeah, I love the whole, especially in a movie theater. I love being surrounded by other people that some are fans, some are not. Some detest the genre and were dragged there by someone else. There's always that one, you know, grandparent that is being way too nice to their grandson or granddaughter and took them to see a movie you know they're going to hate. But they make noise. They're reacting. And I'm sorry, we live in a society that doesn't react to jack shit anymore.
Wow, that's a brilliant point. You know, you just nailed it, I think, that people are so desensitized and not necessarily politically correct, but afraid, right? And
reserved, but reserved in it's not legitimately like that's just part of the personality. They feel like that's the appropriate thing to be.
Mm-hmm.
And I hate that. Let's be real. I always say that I'm the biggest opponent of censorship you're ever going to meet, simply because I want to know the people with bad ideas. You know?
Yeah.
I want to know where they are. And yeah, it's painful to hear them sometimes, but you know what? I'd rather know. And that's kind of the same thing with horror. Horror doesn't have that instinct. It's like, nope, we're going to go places. We're going to show you things that you don't want to see. You know that kid that would eat anything in the back of the classroom? We're all that kid today.
Yeah. And, you know, you mentioned like sitting in a theater with the proverbial newbies or green audience members who don't know what's coming. It might be their first horror movie in a long time outside of Halloween or something. There is this dark, twisted part of us that likes to see their innocence spoiled too, I think. It's like, you know, you're one of us now. You've gone through this, right? And it's okay. Like the laughter means it's going to be okay, or maybe it won't, but you know, have a laugh before you die, kind of thing. You know, it's a very human kind of communal thing to laugh. You know, I always just laugh nervously too, so I don't know. Maybe I shouldn't be theorizing this right now, but I think humor has an important role to play in the horror genre. You know, writers like Jeff Strand are the more popular horror writers today that are kind of working on the laughable side. But I mean, I think even someone like Edgar Allan Poe, you know, he had the concept, the imp of the perverse, right? It's kind of like this dark jester or clown, you know, twisted clown concept. And like the torturers in the Pit of the Pendulum and stories like that are kind of like that. They're the precursors for Freddy Krueger making a wisecrack before he rips your skull off or something. There's always like this humorous side to the genre, and it's part of this like chaos of what we do, the kind of like eruption out of the blue, you know. And like I say this in some of my classes sometimes, so I feel like I say it too often, but you know, gag means two things that are very similar. Yeah, it's a joke, but also to kind of laugh at a joke. And, you know, it's a very guttural response to laugh. And that's kind of what we're aiming for as horror authors. We're not always in the heady philosophical side of the spiritual realm of the occult or whatever. Often we're going for the gut punch, gross out kind of thing. And that is very similar to going for a belly laugh.
And there's a lot of similarities to developing a joke to developing an effective scare, right? Yeah. It's all about set up and swing through and then know when to cut off the laughter with something else, because nothing is worse for a comedian than to let the laughter trail off. Right?
I love that you're using words like swing through and cut and trail off. Sounds like a slasher movie to me, Lauren. But
I could never write I do love some slasher films, but I could never write pure slasher.
Why not?
I
They're
just
too
don't think I have
simple?
anything. I don't think no, because I desperately want to write something simple again after the last few things, but I just don't think that there's anything for me to say in it. Which maybe there doesn't need to be, but I don't know if I could keep myself engaged for 80,000 words in something that I don't have something to say with.
Yeah. Well, I always go back with the slasher kind of subgenre. I always go back to the movie The Stepfather. Like to me, that is a crazy movie. It's hilarious, when you watch it, you laugh. But it's the kind of the perverse allegory of it all. It makes you rethink your assumptions about family structures and how people fall through the cracks and exploit that for their own sick needs. And I read an article once that claimed it's a very feminist film too, because it shows the daughter in the movie who figures out that this stepfather guy is insane killer. It shows how she survives when he's attacking her with a knife, and that teaches you like survival skills and what to do if you're being chased down the street or something by some crazy guy.
I believe the genre is not just feminist. I think it is always empowering the underdog, but it does so in a way that is very unpopular today in one respect, which is it's not doing it through some kind of fantasy fulfillment. It's doing it through showing a real struggle that gets bloody and nasty, and someone overcomes that. And they're traditionally from a group that's not expected to, right? Whether it's the teenage girl or if it's the geeky outsider or whatever it is. But I think that it's important for people to realize that the kind of fantasy wish fulfillment thing that we're seeing more often with like the superhero films and that sort of thing really is the opposite of horror. Because horror is saying, no, we're going to make everyone earn it. And I think that's
I like that.
I think that's a really positive thing long term. Now, it's not going to make people feel good necessarily in the short term. People like you and me, yes. But people who are going to watch Captain Marvel don't realize that Laurie Strode is a more powerful woman than Captain Marvel is by far.
Interesting.
Because we don't need to power her up. She's a regular girl who finds it inside herself to survive. Right?
Right. I mean, that's why people like Batman a lot too, I think. It's like he's more of the common man, even though he's like the rich guy.
Precisely.
But you're right. It's like superheroes are supernatural, but we don't think of them that way, right? I know Alan Moore did some work with that, had some fun with that.
And Ellis did as well, yeah.
Sure. So, I mean, nothing's cut and dried, but, the Avengers series, though, like, they're supernatural creatures and beings, right? That's a science fiction movie, really, but it's not dark. It has some dark moments, the whole sequence or series, but imagine a horrific take on that. I'd love to see that.
So we're going to let Dan have one more question.
Okay.
Do you have a favorite horror comedy film?
Oh God. Well, I mean, it's hard to pick favorites. I love them all. But let me name three, I guess. I don't want to give lists. I love Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein. Just that, this is like the primary text for me for horror and comedy, working with tropes and yet using the kind of structure of the haunted house and the monster film, the creature feature, I guess, as a kind of platform on which to tell jokes. And anything with Peter Lorre in it, by the way, in my mind is a horror comedy, even though that wouldn't be marketed that way, because he just makes me laugh my head off. I love Peter Lorre. Second one would have to be Young Frankenstein. Okay, Mel Brooks. Again, it's more comedy than horror, and the same thing would go with maybe Abbott and Costello. But I don't need to say anything about Young Frankenstein. I mean, that film speaks for itself. It's a parody, but it's its own film, and it's really a homage
Hugely
to the
respectful.
original. Yes,
both of them are, by the way, that you've mentioned.
That's true. And the third one I throw out there, just to kind of, this is the way I think. Evil Dead 2 by Sam Raimi, okay, is hilarious. Bruce Campbell, his acting is so over the top. It's like he's up there at the Nicolas Cage level of overacting, and it's very expressive and expressionistic, but it's just hilarious. Evil Dead 2 is constantly taking the lid off of things and just making you laugh. Everything's a jack in the box in that movie, from the directing to the acting. The writing is kind of dumb, but that's all right. The dialogue, Bruce Campbell makes it work, and every other actor in that film, even the zombies or whatnot, and the tree, they're secondary to Bruce Campbell or Ash, right? Overacting in that film. Now, the other Evil Dead movies, Army of Darkness and whatnot, Ash versus Evil Dead, that stuff's cute. But Evil Dead 2 was still kind of purporting to take itself seriously. And so when you watch it, you go into it thinking this is going to be a regular, straightforward horror film. And it just keeps going into these weird places that make you uncomfortable and yet laugh along with a lot of it. So,
my first experience with Evil Dead 2, everyone thinks I'm just nuts for this, but I was taking the film dead serious until the woman caught the eyeball in her mouth when Ash stomped on the creature's head. That was the moment that I realized, no, I wasn't taking it wrong. There was a straight up slapstick here. But up to that point, I was just thinking, this is coming off as funny, but I think they're trying to be serious.
Mm-hmm.
And then that scene happened. And I was like, oh, okay, I get it.
Excellent. Yeah, it's splat stick, isn't it? It's splat stick. And the eyeball, and we also with the dismembered hand kind of crawling away and then giving him the finger and the voice it has, or something like that. It's hilarious. You have to watch it, folks. If you have not seen the original Evil Dead 2, you must see it. But you should also see the remake of the Evil Dead that recently came out maybe 3 years ago. It's really a strong movie. It stands up on its own. Even though it's a remake, it's good.
Besides that opening scene, yep.
Okay.
The opening scene that could be removed and nothing changes about the whole film, yeah, that could go.
But the bathroom scene, Lauren, the bathroom scene makes that movie.
I love the remake. I think it was great. It opens in that Shack in the Woods with the witch character?
Yeah.
Never comes back to it. Never. It's just like, whatever.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember it. And
cut that.
It felt gratuitous in a way. It was like there they were trying too hard. The rest of it, they were having fun, I think.
Yeah, definitely. So I wanted to, we're coming up on an hour, but I'm going to waste a little bit more of your time. It always goes incredibly fast. I warn everyone, but no one. I want to talk about something very specific in your career, though, because it's a moment that I think probably was very special to you. But I would be mind blown if it were my experience, and of course it's not. In 2006, you make a sale to Cemetery Dance, issue 55, with a short story called Help Yourself that was co-written by Mark McLaughlin. You share pages with Stephen Graham Jones and Lisa Morton, and it's kind of the best issue of that magazine from that era.
Huh.
It had to be a big moment for you.
Yeah, sure. Cemetery Dance was always one of those brass ring magazines. I think a lot of horror writers or short story writers in this genre, they aim to be in Cemetery Dance. It's like the magazine. It's dominated the scene for the past at least 20 years. The problem is that it's very full all the time. They publish a lot of, they solicit some things from big name authors that, Rich Chismar knows and things like that. So there's a little bit of in-house publishing to it. So it's very hard to get in to a few slots that might be open a couple of years from now. And they're good at holding back and saying, we can only publish so many stories per issue. So it's very tough to get into, but everybody respects it. Everybody loves it. And even the books they do, like I will always buy the best of Cemetery Dance, no matter which volume comes out, because those anthologies are a little expensive, but always good. And they do extract pretty much the best of the magazine over the years. Am I answering your question? I mean, it was a big deal to me. It was great to be in it. I love always seeing what artwork they come up with, because that's something I really admire. In all the magazines I've published in, I'm always blown away by the artwork. And for the longest time, I was convinced this is why I write, to see what weird artwork they'll come up with to go with my story. And when it's good, I'm flabbergasted and love it. I always love the cover art. I always love the illustrations in the magazine. And if it's in color or 2 pages, To me, that's more of a reward than a paycheck, depending on how much it is. I love seeing the artwork. I love just, it's almost as if they made a movie out of your story or something. That's kind of the feel of it.
It's gobsmacking when you get galleys of the cover art and you realize it's based on your work and someone put this much effort and it's this good. It's because writing is a solitary thing. I mean, as much as we try and make it not, maybe it is. There's not a lot of validation, and maybe we shouldn't be searching for validation, but we're human. It's a big thing, like when you see that artwork for the first time. It's even more if you're asked your opinion of it, which some publishers do, some don't. But when that happens, that's even more mind blowing because you're almost afraid to say anything because you're like, but they worked so hard on it, and it's based on me.
Right. Well, yeah. I've been but to go back to the root of your question, I think all of us who read a lot in this genre, we're attracted to things that are very high quality, and our genre is lucky enough to have them. Sometimes they're in small press markets that the average person never finds out about. Cemetery Dance used to be on magazine newsstand shelves all over the place, mostly Barnes and Noble and things. Nowadays, it's a little harder to find. Unless you go online and, look for it, you might not find it. So it's one of those things. The magazine universe has kind of dwindled over the past 20 years, and it's sad to see it kind of not have the grip on people that it used to.
Oh yeah, I mean, I remember walking into a Borders or even a Barnes and Noble at that time, and you'd find an issue of Pulp House or Horror Show, and it was like you couldn't walk out without a horror fiction magazine in those days. Not that there was a ton of them, but there was always a clutch of them, right?
Yeah. Oh man, you mentioned the Horror Show magazine. To me, that was the Cemetery Dance of its day. Daniel Silva was editing it. That's right, David B. Silva. I always wished I could have appeared in that magazine.
Again, if you look, I think it's issue 13, has the clown with the blood that has a hat with with what's clearly a dead rabbit inside. But that issue, I mean, you look at it and it has a Hodge story as its featured story.
Brian Hodge, yeah.
It's like the early days of that. It's bringing up all these others, and Pulp House. I don't remember if you remember the hardbound magazine, but of course there was a paper edition. Just so many artists that were coming up through the ranks and figuring out their strengths. It was the weightlifting to get to the pros,
Yeah, and can I say this really kind of circles back to what we were talking about at the beginning in many ways. Like the Del Abyss line that we were talking about, grave markings and Gene Cavalos and such. That is the last chapter in Grady Hendrix's book, The Paperbacks from Hell. It's about Del Abyss and those book covers kind of being the end point of paperback horror history. Kind of like the last albums or LPs, albums that were printed, where the cover art mattered a lot. And the Horror Show, Cemetery Dance, these magazines that you're referring to, even Dead of Night, like these were like the professionalized small press. It's where kind of like the classics emerged. And it's great to be a part of publishing and being a part of a genre for many years and seeing those kind of not markets but platforms emerge. Like who is going to be the classics of today? That's what I'm always trying to figure out. And you just use your own readerly instinct as a writer and say, this place has great cover art. This place you can tell the editor does their job. They don't just clean up the typos. You can tell they put their imprint or signature on the stories they're picking. And I'm always on the lookout for that. And so like Raw Dog Screaming Press is one of the publishers I work with. I feel like they're one of those publishers that do that. And there are others that are emerging right now that are presses to watch. So it's like Strange House Books is one that I'm like buying all their books because I think they're going to be a very collectible book publisher. They do quality work, they have great art, they pay attention to what they're doing, and it's a quality product.
So we're approaching the end, so I want to make sure. First off, people, how can they follow you? How can they keep on the Arnzen train?
Oh, well. Oh, don't get me started. If you want to follow me, I guess if you're a part of Twitter, follow me on Twitter, okay? It's at Mike Arnzen, and that's my go-to place it's kind of like those Gorlick poems. I'll publish a lot of weird, short things that can only fit in a tweet. That's kind of what I like to do as a creative exercise. And some of those things end up reprinted in my books. They're so crazy. So I would love for, horror fans to just follow me there. And I always post news there. I used to run a newsletter actually called the Gore Letter that, a lot of people used to like, because I would use it as like a magazine. I would just write creative things and not just always pimp my own books or whatever. I'd actually use it as like, a creative toy, literary toy. So, but I got so many things I'm working on that I can't keep that up the way I wanted to anymore. So my website though is gorlitz.com. I just restarted it from scratch. So if people want to visit that, they can find out more of my books. But I'm on Amazon and iTunes and all over the place. There's even a CD of my audio readings. If you're curious, go to Bandcamp and type in Arnzen in a search and see what you can find.
So I want to talk a little bit about the future, and then we're going to call it a night. But so the genre is as popular as it's ever been in some ways, and it's also probably vulnerable in a different way, because I don't see us having exactly that small press physical book world for the new writers coming up. And even established writers who've published, it can be sometimes a little daunting, the new landscape.
Yeah.
Where do you see it going? Are you full of hope, or are you full of trepidation at the moment? What's really, how do you feel about the genre at this moment?
Well, I mean, it's really an abundance of treasure. Imagine discovering a cave that was filled with treasure, shiny objects, but you couldn't tell what was the really valuable gold in all the shiny objects. And that's kind of the hard part right now, is sifting through all the overabundance, this ocean of creativity that's available to us at the click of a button. You can open a doorway and be showered with vampire stories if that's your thing. And you could end up spending 30 years just reading vampire stuff and things that you like, and kind of become over enamored with the niche market, the sub genre that speaks to your tastes. And to me, that's just as bad as like only listening to one news station. Like, the genre is, wide tent, if I can use that expression. It's a big tent, and there's just so much weirdness going on. And if you're really into the weirdness of vampires, look behind your back, look around. You're going to find some crazy weirdness that's vampiric, but has nothing to do with vampires. And, you'd never find it if you were just doing a Google search for vampire fiction. Now, that's just a random example, but, I think we're being trained by publishing to kind of connect with these niche markets and to forget about the bigger picture due to market competition. And that's sad. The best thing you can do is know your horror history. Buy some books that are just collections of the best of the year. Cemetery Dance put out an anthology called The Century's Best Horror Fiction from the 20th Century. It's a 2-volume set. Get that. Read it. It has one classic from each year in the 20th century in it. One selected horror story from each year. I kind of wanted to be in 1994, Lauren, but no, Poppy Z had to take that spot. Dar!
That was Poppy's year. I mean, I wouldn't even argue with that.
I'm just kidding. I wouldn't argue with it either. Poppy Z Bright's great. But, there's probably a lot of people listening to this who don't know who Poppy Z Bright is or was, and that's a shame, because they should.
There's a list of artists that unfortunately fall into that category.
Yeah.
But you know what? That's what the goal should be with all of our conversations, is to bring other people up to speed on the stuff now and in years past that maybe has fallen through the cracks?
That's a great point. And this is really what I think the future is that we kind of need some kind of arbiter or educator, some leaders in the genre to kind of point our way around so we can navigate this crazy overabundance of texts. It's hard to sort through it all and easy to give up and say, I don't know, where all these books suck when you've only read 5.
Right.
Because there's just so many titles, and that means there's so many more opportunities to read a bad book and be turned off by it. So to find the good stuff becomes much more difficult. Hopefully, it's my hope that there'll be like signature publishers like Raw Dog Screaming Press, like Del Abyss, where the editorial viewpoint is one that readers kind of can trust and say, I'm just going to buy this book because it's the latest that they put out. And it's kind of like the way record labels work.
Exactly where I was going to go. When I was growing up, anything Enigma Records or Restless Records put out, I bought. If I found it, I bought them because I knew it was going to be bizarre, unlike anything else. And even when it was in a genre, whether it was like glam metal or punk rock, it was not going to sound like any of the peers at the time. Until 3 years later when everyone was ripping off those bands.
Right.
So, yeah, I mean, that's exactly what we need. We need a lot more presence for, I don't want to say the tastemakers or the influencers, but we need people who really are putting a stamp of quality on everything they do, so there's a trust.
Yeah. And the equivalent of like a independent bookstore clerk or something like that, right? It's like in music, maybe the record store down the street. There might be a cool person there. You could just say, what's new on the shelves these days? That kind of thing. Somebody who's like a librarian. People who cultivate and read these things. You got to find your person that you consider a leader or a mentor. Kind of just communicate with them or follow them online, and that's a good way to kind of make sure you're keeping yourself real with this stuff and finding things you wouldn't find on your own.
Well, Mike, thanks so much for coming on in here. This is always the easy conversations, the people that I just connect with, period. So I want to really thank you for coming on. I know that the audience loved it. The chat was pretty active tonight.
Oh, good.
And I want to just say to everyone, on Monday at 9 a.m., Ramsey Campbell on this channel. This is a chance to talk to a god among men in the genre. I'm not exaggerating that at all.
Yes.
I think Ramsey Campbell has to be one of the top 3 living horror writers. Has to be.
His book, The Face That Must Die, was one of the ones that made me realize, there's more than Stephen King and Clive Barker out there. And I hate to be too entrepreneurial, but I have to mention this to your audience. Sure. I'm working on this book series, Exploring Dark Short Fiction. It's a collection of the best works selected by an individual author. This one is on Steve Rasnick Town. And I bring it up only because the one I'm working on right now for the next book is Ramsey Campbell. So keep your eyes peeled for that one. It should be out probably by the end of spring.
And if you haven't picked up the new Campbell.
I still need to get that, yeah.
Flame Tree were nice enough to send it to me in advance of our conversation, which is a first, by the way. Publishers usually are not even aware or care, but they were really good to me. Ramsey Campbell's one of those guys I've looked up to my whole life, it feels like. And the fact that he was so gracious in our conversations thus far about setting up the show, unbelievable. Yeah. So really looking forward to that. And of course, then on Monday the 1st, 8 p.m., Gene Cavellos. Which another just titan of the genre, a little bit less recognized for her contributions, perhaps. But we're going to start changing that. We're going to change that conversation.
Good. She deserves a Lifetime Achievement Award or something. I mean, she really does.
All right. Thank you, everyone, and I hope to see you in just a couple days.
Thanks.
You don't have to do that.
I think we do.